tends to not hold the soil in very well. And again, farming with chemicals and pesticides and things like that poisons our water, poisons our soil, leads to a loss of biodiversity. Increased food miles is also a major issue when you have a very industrialized system and your food is being grown halfway across the world. It means that the food that we get in the grocery store is not just the practices of what's growing it, but also how is it getting here and how much fossil fuels are we using just to get it onto your plate. Um, and then there's an ethical component too of when we talk about like animal systems. um, the way we raise animals conventionally is just really inhumane. In addition to being all these other things, well, bad for the climate and unsustainable, it's also just not something that I think we can feel very good about when we really know what's going on there. So conventional agriculture kind of looks like this. If you have been around conventional farms at all, this is kind of what we're used to seeing. So this is our very a normal field of grain crops that we'll see kind of all over the country, not just here in Pennsylvania, but pretty much everywhere. This is what our farm fields typically look like. Um, and you and the, this is this is definitely what conventional agriculture is all about here. Mechanized monoculture crops, which basically just means you're growing one crop in a big, vast, large area. And with that comes a lot of pest problems and a lot of other problems. When you reduce the biodiversity to an area to just one single crop, it gives us lots of problems. um, and so these would be managed with herbicide, lots and lots of glyphosate, usually genetically modified crops, hybrid seeds. So it also locks farmers into a very kind of input uh, input reliant system too, which is not so good for farmers economically. This is an orchard here on the right, a conventional orchard. This is what modern orchards look like, managed conventionally. We think of orchards of these big towering trees, in an idyllic situation where you reach up and grab an apple or maybe climb up on a ladder and do that. And that's sort of what we have going on here at 100 Fruit Farm. But conventionally, this is the modern way of managing orchards, which is very small trees on trellises, usually picked from the ground, sprayed with a whole bunch of different sprays. You can see the herbicide strips from reducing the weeds there. So they'll spray herbicide and then manage it with a bunch of insecticides and things like that. Um, so in terms of animal farming, I kind of hate to show these pictures because they're not anything anybody wants to see. And these are really actually not the goriest of the worst pictures of conventional animal farming. These are pretty tame. But this is basically what we're dealing with when we're eating meat and we're eating eggs and things like that from the grocery store. These are the conditions in which these animals are being raised, and mostly indoor conditions, very much packed into small spaces, not allowed to the animals themselves aren't allowed to really do their behaviors, their natural behaviors. They're really forced to live in these very unnatural conditions in which they really don't have a lot of room to move around and be healthy too, because when you have that many animals concentrated in a relatively small area, you have a lot of disease and other issues that comes from that as well. So just I did mention we'll kind of get into climate change, and yeah, this is where we get into it a little bit. It's important to know that conventional farming practices are really accelerating climate change. So, this is one of the biggest problems of the 21st century that we're dealing with right now is how do we deal with, our climate just being totally out of whack. Um, and I think it was a study in Nature this year that basically figured out that our global food system it's basically responsible for 30% of our annual total emissions. When you consider the massive, factories out there just shooting lots of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere like 24/7, that's actually pretty considerable. That agriculture, which we think of as fairly natural, and we're working with plants and animals you know, the land, and a lot of people think of it as very idyllic, but really it's actually a major contributor to climate change rather than being a sink of carbon as it should be. Um, it's also completely reliant on these petroleum derived synthetic inputs. So the fertilizers farmers use in a conventional setting is all basically from oil, a mined resources that is going to run out eventually. And additionally, it's not very good for our soil too. So when you use conventional farming practices, you get a lot of soil erosion. So that's what's going on in this picture here. And if you live where I do, or in most parts of this region outside of the city, you know, if you look at your farming fields during the winter, you'll see a lot of this, you know, this erosion going on where there's gullies in the farm field, because the soil is so unhealthy and there's so little holding everything together that you get a little bit of rain and it just washes all the soil out, and that creates major problems. Um, so, you know, soil erosion doesn't sound like, oh, who cares, right? But it's really the second largest source of anthropogenic emissions of greenhouse gases. So when we erode the soil, we're losing a lot of carbon from our land, which is a big problem. And then a lot of that is going to end up in the atmosphere in various ways through the carbon cycle. Um, so that's the bad stuff. Let's talk about, you know, regenerative ag now, and permaculture and agroecology. And speaking of those terms, what do those even mean, right? So you've probably heard these terms before and wondering like, what, how do they relate to each other and what do they mean? So I just want to talk about that real quick. So when we talk about regenerative agriculture, we're really focusing on farming practices that like sequester carbon and improve the quality of our soil, improve the quality of the water and the wildlife habitat and biodiversity. So, you know, that's opposed to like the word sustainable, where, you know, when you're sustaining something, you're just doing it indefinitely, right? You're just trying to do the same thing, and keep the resources you have. But when we're working in degraded ecosystems and degraded land and degraded soil, we really need to be using farming practices that are actually healing the land, that are improving the soil, building soil, sinking carbon, more and more carbon into the soil. So that's what we really mean by regenerative. We're trying to really improve everything while we're doing these farming practices. Um, so agroecology is a term that is kind of confusing because it can mean a few different things, but it's basically a scientific discipline, and also a social movement. And it's very much heavily influenced by like indigenous farming practices, which is why this term agroecology is used very widely in like the global South, in particular South America, where there's a long history of indigenous farming down there. Um, so it really focuses on, you know, right, agriculture, and also like the whole ecological systems that we have, our ecosystems. So thinking about farms as more than just the sum of their parts, but also a functioning ecosystem, and how do those things work together. Um, Permaculture is what we are doing here at 100 Fruit Farm. We're really doing all these things, but we really identify with the label of permaculturists. And it's basically, it stands for permanent agriculture, permanent culture. It's an applied design methodology and ethical framework. So you know, we have the core ethics of permaculture of care for the earth, care for the soil, and fair share. And so, you know, it's not just design methodology in that sense, or not just a science in that it is incorporating these ethical guidelines too, which you don't necessarily have in regenerative agriculture or agroecology, but which we definitely have in permaculture. But we are seeking to create regenerative agricultural systems and regenerative human systems, just human living systems, but we're mimicking natural ecosystem systems. So permaculture really takes its inspiration from what's happening in nature. How does nature effectively grow things without inputs, or with as little? Yeah, well, nature has its own inputs really, just from the trees and the soil and leaves and animals. So we mimic that in permaculture. But we also are influenced heavily by, again, indigenous cultures. So all of these things are very much intertwined. When you hear regenerative agriculture, agroecology, permaculture, they're all kind of part of this broader movement of trying to farm better, basically, and in a very climate-friendly way, and in a people-friendly way, an animal-friendly way as well. So Um, so it's an important solution for climate change. Rodale Institute is up in Kutztown, not far from us, and they're a really great farm and education center. Really, they're more of a research farm than anything. They've been one of the pioneers of the organic farming movement, and they've been the ones who've kind of shattered the myth that you may have heard the criticism of organic farming more broadly, that organic farming can't feed the world, right? Like, oh, how nice this is, but we'd never be able to feed the world that way. But Rodale has done the research that shows that's really not true. The yields of organic farming are better or as good as conventional farming, basically. Because while conventional farming might be better in like a given year, an ordinary year of better yields, in droughts and things like that, organic yields actually tend to outperform the conventional system. So that's kind of one myth. But another really important thing to know is that regenerative farming is how we lock soil into the carbon into the soil. So, and this is just the graphic that they show. That regenerative grazing and regenerative cropping systems combined could basically sequester more annual carbon than we're actually emitting into the atmosphere with our current practices. So, in theory, if the world were to switch to regenerative farming and bring all that carbon back into the soil, we wouldn't really have a big problem with climate change anymore. It could solve the climate crisis. So we think of all these technological solutions to climate change, and there's definitely many political solutions. A lot of this does involve political solutions of policy, but the technology is right here. We have it. It's technology we already know about, and that is just regenerative practices. So yeah, regenerative farming is all about not competing with nature, but really partnering with nature, trying to get nature to do things for you. Not just seeing the soil as an inert substance, but something that's vital to everything we do and something that we want to protect and improve. And instead of just growing monoculture crops, we're very much about growing diversity, a little bit of everything. And the more diverse you are, really, the stronger everything is. And very much holistic in that way. So these are some pictures from our farm here at 100 Fruit Farm. And this is just sort of some examples of how regenerative farming and permaculture works. So, we have a lot of perennial systems. So like almost everything you see here, except for the bottom picture, which are annual vegetable garden, well, actually the top right is as well. But a lot of things we're doing here are perennials. So they're crops that like trees and bushes that once you plant them, you don't have to continually replant them every year like you would corn or lettuce or something. There's a place for annuals too, but we can grow a lot of perennial crops that we just plant once, and then we never have to till that soil. We don't have to plow that soil annually. We can just kind of take care of those crops and get a lot of great yields from them. So we also use animals quite extensively in permaculture and regenerative farming to not only get whatever we're getting for those animals, whether it be wool or meat or eggs or whatever, but we're also getting important functions, right? So just like animals play a role in an ecosystem in nature and natural ecosystems, also in agro ecosystems, they also play roles for us. So they manure our fields. The sheep, actually help keep our grass down. It help eliminate the competition that our fruit trees have. So we use our sheep actually right in our orchard and have them graze right through the orchard. And they're basically taking care of our fruit trees for us in a way, and the fruit trees are kind of taking care of the sheep, giving them the shade they need. So we're creating these kind of synergistic relationships that you'd see in nature, and we're mimicking those. We've got the ducks, patrolling our perennial gardens, eating the slugs and snails, and dropping a little bit of fertilizer for us as well. The annual crops that we grow in our vegetable garden, we're growing in these permanent beds with permanent paths that are wood chipped. So we're sinking carbon in there every year by putting more wood chips down. And we're not having to till those beds annually. We can use no dig practices, so we're not having to disrupt the soil, because whenever you're tilling the soil, you're going to lose carbon to the atmosphere, basically. And another big thing we do here, I mentioned a lot of perennial crops. So we're all about trying to grow things in the most regenerative way possible. And for us, a big part of that is not using sprays. So we kind of take the conventional wisdom of, well, you can't really grow fruit without sprays, and we just say that's ridiculous, that's rubbish. We're going to grow all these things and we're going to do them without any sprays whatsoever, and show you that it's very much possible. And so by not spraying, we are able to really bring in a lot of wildlife. Our birds and insect life are amazing here in the farm because we're not doing any spraying. Whereas on conventional farms, you're going to be spraying and killing so many of the beneficial insects that you actually need to help with your own pest control. So, when you spray and suddenly your mantises are gone, for example, there's nothing to maybe eat those pest insects that can now spread and proliferate across your orchard, for example, and then you have to spray more. So, we just don't want to get locked into that at all. And instead, we rely on no spray methods and try to be careful about what kind of fruits we grow, trying to pick ones that we know are really good for no spray conditions. So these are just from the upper left. We've got white currants. This is just a mix of different berries we have in June that I just grabbed from my yard and from literally right outside my door. And my little my landscaping systems basically are filled with fruit, so I can just walk out the door, grab a bunch of berries and strawberries and things, throw them into my granola and yogurt, and have that for breakfast in June. And there's probably maybe 7 different types of berries in here. Raspberries, autumn berries, peaches, pawpaws, black currants. Just a small sample of the many, many things we grow here without sprays, and they're all so delicious and really healthy as well. So we also use silvopasture systems. So I mentioned that we have the sheep through the orchard. This is our orchard here. It includes some black locust trees too, which are more of a timber crop, but everything else you see, they're young fruit trees there. So the sheep are grazing in the orchard. They're fertilizing, they're keeping the grass down. And you can see the shade cast by that tree there is exactly what sheep need when they're grazing. So if you don't have trees, you have to have some sort of shade structure, some sort of building to give them that shade. Here we're getting the trees to give the sheep what they want and the sheep to give the trees what they want. And we bring in chickens too into our orchard, so that the fallen fruit that contains insect larvae that would then eat their way out of the fruit, burrow into the ground, and come back next year, those insect larvae will get eaten by the chickens, and then that just kills their whole life cycle. And then those insects aren't going to come back stronger next year. They're going to come back weaker with a smaller population. So it's a way we can manage insect pests without having to, again, resort to sprays. So silvopasture systems, all that really means is like silvo woods, right, and pasture. So we're using trees, but trees with a canopy that aren't so thick that we're still able to bring in enough light to the understory and grow grass and other things there. So this is our orchard we're establishing from like just an old hayfield that was completely open. And then in some other areas on the farm, we have wooded areas that we're thinning out a little bit to bring in more light there, so that we can manage that area as a silvopasture as well, by thinning out the canopy and able to get some more light and get some forages, some grasses and clover in there. And silvopasture, I should mention too, has also been listed as one of the major ways, one of the best methods in farming to sink carbon into the soil, because you're sinking it in multiple ways, right? Grazing, regenerative grazing, when you rotate the animals like we do through the farm, where they're constantly on the move and being rotated, that brings carbon into the soil and improves our the carbon over time. And also trees, of course, right? Their carbon sinks as well. So by growing these trees and doing the pasture at the same time, we're basically able to get the maximum amount of carbon into the soil. And it's really, really fantastic way to mitigate climate change or to maybe help bring things back to a balance. Um, so it's important to know too that permaculture is something, and regenerative agriculture, we think of regenerative agriculture as for farmers, and it kind of is, it's agriculture is, by definition farms, right? But permaculture is really more than just farming. So permaculture systems, we're using this design process and design methodology to create these kind of systems wherever we have the chance to do that. Wherever there's land that people are living in, permaculture is applicable. So if you have like a tiny little urban lot where you have just a tiny yard, that can be used to grow a lot of food there. Even if you don't have a yard and have like a south facing window or a balcony, that can still be used to grow lots of food. Suburban areas are totally underutilized when it comes to growing food. So that really should be a major focus of us is to try to bring in more food systems into the cities and suburbs where most people live, right? So in 2020, 56.2% of the world's population is now urban. So, and that's increasing every year. The whole world is becoming more and more urban. So the closer we can grow our food to where it's being consumed, the better that's going to be for our climate and for our food miles and things like that. So it's estimated that urban agriculture by itself, just growing food in the cities, and I'm not even sure if that's including the suburbs, could meet basically 15 to 20% of global food demand. And I know certainly around where I am here in Bucks County, that there's so many just yards of grass everywhere that aren't being managed well at all. We'll get to that in a moment of how we can improve those. So one thing I do here, in addition to being a farm, I also do designs for people. And there are other permaculture designers in the area who do the same thing. So we all do designing in a kind of different way, but our goals are all the same, which is basically to design these types of systems for people wherever they might be. So a lot of the clients I work with are just people who have suburban lots. These basically blank grass canvases in most cases, or just kind of sterile ornamental landscaping. And they're like, we really want to, make these landscapes be functional. And we want to grow our own food. And we want to do it in a healthy and natural way. And that's the kind of thing I can help them with. By designing these systems so that they are resilient and they're not going to need the kind of sprays that you have in conventional systems. So people can grow their berries, their fruit, their herbs, their vegetables, all on their quarter acre or third of an acre or fifth of an acre, or whatever it is. And they're not growing 100% of their own food, but they're able to grow, a lot of really delicious stuff and stuff that can't be gotten at the grocery store very easily, and eat a much healthier diet, and enjoy their whole landscape that they're living in as well. So yeah, so this is something that I kind of divide my time doing. So half my time is basically working with clients on this kind of design work, and half my time is running my farm. But they're kind of integrated together too, because one informs the other. So I'm able to experiment here at the farm and figure out what grows best for us here in this climate without any sprays, and then help my clients by helping them pick these things that are these fruit trees that don't need sprays, basically, that don't need any extra care. So but what permaculture is able to do is basically turn lawns like this, which we see all over the area, right? What we see here is basically a monoculture, again, just like in the conventional crop farming. We've got just a monoculture lawn. It's the lawn care companies. They want to urge us to believe that everything that's not grass is your enemy, right? It's got to be removed. It's got to be killed with poison. The dandelions, they got to go. The violets, kill those too. Clover, oh, that's the worst. Kill that. When in reality, all these things are great. They're wonderful to have in our lawns. They actually flower and bring in pollinators. And they'll bring in a lot of other insect life as well. So instead of having this sterile landscape where it's just grass, If you have lawn and just stop spraying it and stop putting down fertilizer on it, you're going to have a much ecologically healthier landscape, from just the diversity that comes naturally in any sort of pasture or lawn. So that's one thing that we can do. But also, let's get rid of that grass as much as possible, instead of having this grass. And we got, I think, looks like some boxwood shrubs and just kind of sterile ornamental plants that don't really do anything. They're just there because they're easy to maintain and they look acceptable to people. But to me, that doesn't even really, no one really is wowed by these plants anymore. No one sees a boxwood or I don't know, just your common ornamental hosta or something like that, and is amazed by how cool they look. They're kind of something we almost don't see anymore. So instead, these are the kind of systems that we'd be creating in permaculture, where that grass is basically completely gone, or is gone as much as possible, because some people still want a little bit of grass. But as much grass as you can get rid of in a system and replace it with fruit trees and berry plants and herbs and maybe little garden ponds, and wildflowers, right? The more flowers and native plants we bring in, the more we're able to help with some of those issues that insects are facing right now, where we're basically in a mass extinction event as we speak. And insects and birds and amphibians and all these other kinds of wildlife, they're disappearing before our eyes. And by having just agricultural little landscapes like this, and really they're more than just agriculture, right? They're cultural landscapes where we can enjoy ourselves and hang out in, and have a patio where you can pick kiwis from an arbor above you, and just enjoy life. That's what a lot of people want, really. So not only are these good for wildlife, um, they're good for the climate. They're good for our soul too. They're just enjoyable systems to be in, and it's a healthy thing for just to be outside and working in these systems. So, these are just some examples of what permaculture systems can kind of look like in a small setting or suburban setting as well. This one's actually from our farm. So even though we are a farm, we are kind of rural. We're 10 acres here. Near the house, we still have these kind of systems, so that as soon as we walk out the door, we have our herbs and we have our berries and everything that we can access without having to walk way down into our farm or go into these like farming fields to get these things. So they're important at any scale, really, to be creating these functional landscapes where you're able to grow a lot of your own needs, essentially. There's about a million other things I would love to talk about, but I know we only have a half an hour here. So with that, I think I pretty much used up my time. So I will stop here, and we'll go from there.
So there have been a number of questions, so I'll just dive in with some of the earliest ones.
Okay, great.
First, some people have been asking about whether we record, and we are recording, and we'll send a link, but it'll be a week or two. We have to transcribe the recording. So just so people know, there will be one. Now to the content questions. The first one is, what is your take, Adam, on invasive species like autumn olive? This person said, I see you're growing it, and I've had some moral conundrums with this. Curious about your thoughts on it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there is an autumn olive in this slide. So go back to it. Good spot, by the way. So it's right there, actually. That's on the right. The red berry there is autumn olive. So I think in the permaculture world, we would differ from sort of the native plant enthusiasts, who I think are sometimes a very black and white about this issue of anything that's non-native or naturalized in this area is something we need to eliminate. We need to destroy. I think in permaculture, we really value native plants, for sure. Like, they're really, really important. And if I can't have something that's edible, I'm going to bring in something that's native. And a lot of times I can do both, right? Bring in something that's both edible and native, and that's like a win-win for everything. But occasionally, I think there are place for things like autumn olives. For one thing, they're already naturalized here, so they're not going to really, they're going to be here in our ecosystem now until the next ice age or until humans destroy the planet, because there's really no getting rid of them. So there's really not much sense in thinking of this idealized landscape of what it used to be, because that doesn't exist anymore and never will exist anymore. So, the autumn olives are here. What are we going to do with them? So we can forage them. We can definitely use them. And the more you forage them and eat them, the less they get spread anyway. That's my timer. We can raise cultivated varieties that are yellow. Actually, the one I usually grow is yellow because the birds don't like to eat it and they don't actually spread it as much. So it's mostly me picking them and not as much the birds eating them and spreading them anyway. But also, if you're able to grow your own fruit in your backyard and not have to buy something from the grocery store that might have been grown 3,000 miles away and sprayed with a whole slew of toxic chemicals, there's something to be said for that too. And autumn olive is extremely productive. The cultivated varieties of autumn olive put on for one, single plant, just pounds and pounds and pounds of fruit that don't need any sprays whatsoever. And they fix nitrogen as well. They bring nitrogen actually from the atmosphere and into the soil and help fertilize other plants. So I think there's a responsible setting for them to utilize them in our landscapes, provided that you're managing them. But I would never want to grow anything that I know to be invasive that's not already naturalized, because then we're posing the risk of bringing something in that's not already here and letting it escape and become all over the place. But in the case of autumn olive, I look around me and it's already everywhere it can be ecologically around me in these fields everywhere. To me, it's really not a problem than having it on my farm where it's already coming up wild anyway. But that was a great question. Thanks.
While you're on that slide, somebody
Mhm.
asked earlier when you were talking and you were on this slide, if you could ID these fruits. Do you want to
Yeah,
a quick
yes.
spin through?
I think I did ID them, but I'll do it again. So these are white currants here. These are a very easy plant to grow, about 3 or 4 feet tall. They come in red colors as well and pink colors, and very easy to grow without sprays. In the bowl here, we have, I guess I didn't ID everything that was in this bowl, but we have, those are white. Can you see my mouse pointer at all? Can you see that? Yeah. There's a white currant, alpine strawberries with those little white strawberries, just regular garden strawberries. We have red raspberries in there. These are the red currants, what they look like. Honeyberries, that's what these are. They look like blueberries, but those are actually honeyberries. And I'm probably missing 1 or 2 that might be hidden in here. But yeah, that's a lot of currants and strawberries and things like that. These are red raspberries. This is autumn olive, which I like to call autumn berry because it's not an olive and it confuses people. They're really delicious when they're ripe and when you get the nice cultivated varieties. These are peaches. Everything here is grown on our farm. Pawpaws. These are actually a native fruit, North America's largest edible native fruit, essentially. And they're delicious and they're easy to grow without sprays and they're resistant to deer, one of my favorite fruits. And these are black currants. They're a slightly larger bush than the red and white currants, but also very easy to grow, superfood, really good.
Okay, and the next question is, says, many people grow strawberries in our organic community garden here in Philly.
Mm-hmm.
The plants are hardy, but the strawberries are often eaten by bugs, mice, etc. Our only defense is diatomaceous earth. Any other ideas?
Yeah, I mean that's a tricky one. I think diatomaceous earth is a pretty good solution and it's quite natural and not not harmful in any way to use. I really solved that problem by just planting a lot of strawberries. So I get away with not having many pest problems by just planting, I don't know, I probably have 200 feet of strawberries in my garden or so. I do have mulberries nearby. So one thing you can do is plant something they like better nearby. So mulberries fruit at the same time as strawberries pretty much. And birds prefer mulberries over strawberries. So in terms of the birds, at least, when there's a mulberry tree right overhead or right near my strawberries, They're looking at the strawberries, they're looking at the mulberries, and they go and fly to the mulberries basically. So that's one way I deal with it. I think I use wood chips for my pathways too. I think that helps too, because I don't think slugs, they don't really love crawling over the wood chips because they're kind of dry and sharp and kind of just like the diatomaceous earth. It's just not something they really want to crawl over if they can avoid it. Um, so yeah, those are two things that I do that I think help, and I really quite fortunately have very few issues with pests in my strawberries.
Speaking of a different kind of pest, do you use a deer fence at your farm?
We do, yeah. So um, we do, although right now it's actually the gate is actually broken. So almost for a whole year, the deer have been getting into our farm. So the cool thing to know is like, yes, we do use a deer fence, and it really helps to grow a lot of these amazing things. However, if you can kind of protect a lot of these berry plants and fruit trees kind of in the early years, a lot of them are resistant later on. So like we had our deer fence up in the first, 5 years or so that we had this farm, and we got all our berries and trees established. Now that they're established and the deer fence is down, the deer are here every day now and they're getting in, but they're nibbling on a lot of stuff, but they're really not able to kill it because they're established now. They've got their roots in the ground and they're growing really, really strongly. So, when the deer come and nibble on some leaves here and there, they're just going to grow back, and doesn't really impact our yields that much. So it's good to know too, in suburban situations or whatever, that you can plant a lot of this stuff. And while some of it should be protected early on, a lot of times you can take off that protection over time, and then they can withstand the deer to a certain extent. There are some things that are just not so deer resistant at all, and the deer will always want to eat them. And then there are other things that are very, very resistant, like the pawpaws, where you really hardly need any protection for them at all. But yeah, the deer fence is, kind of an unfortunate thing because we are, as humans, have taken the deer out of balance, right? If this were a natural ecosystem, the deer wouldn't be so prolific that they would be eating everything down to the ground. But when we remove their native predators and we kill off all the wolves and the mountain lions and everything, and bring in all this ornamental landscaping, then the deer population explodes, and now everything's out of balance. And that's why it can make sense to bring something in like a deer fence, which is obviously not natural, but it helps sort of remedy what is a very unnatural issue of us screwing up the deer population essentially.
Do you have gray water systems? And if so, do you collect from the roof? And what roofing material would you recommend if you could choose anything? And do you have any other information on rainwater collection?
Yeah, so those are two different things, right? Gray water systems and rainwater systems. We do a little bit of both here, particularly with the rainwater. We actually have a rainwater system that collects the rainwater, and instead of sending it into like a container, we send it into like a small pond. And then so what happens is that water is able to go into the groundwater and actually go into the ground and recharge our groundwater, which is great. And we can also keep some fish there, some goldfish to as a mosquito trap, so they eat any mosquitoes that try to breed. But you can use rainwater tanks too, and I would highly recommend them for suburban and urban situations. You can make them out of IBCs or barrels. Pretty affordable DIY thing to do. And there's like Odie makes a rainwater diverter that just hooks into your spout basically. Not your spout. What do they call it? The gutter. Hooks into the gutter. You can just take a little piece out of the gutter, hook that in, and then when you get really big storms, most of that water passes through, so it doesn't like blow out your rain barrel, and it just has like a little hose that collects the water that runs down the side. It's quite clever. It also keeps debris and stuff from getting into your rain barrel that easily as well. So I'd recommend that. I forget exactly what it's called, but it's by the company Odie, OATEY. Odie Mystic Rainwater Diverter. Maybe that's it. In terms of gray water systems, we have a tiny house on the farm, and we do have gray water for actually both our tiny houses. It's not a very advanced system right now. It just kind of runs some gravel, which honestly for gray water, oftentimes that's all you really need. But we're going to sort of improve that system by making like a trench and filling it with mulch and having it directly piped into that mulch trench. But yeah, it's something I highly recommend doing too, gray water systems, although it's tricky because the regulations don't really allow for it too much in Pennsylvania. It makes it very complicated. Out west, they have much better local regulations that allow for gray water systems that are simple. Here, really to do it legally in most cases, you'd have to put in a septic tank, which is kind of silly and ridiculous. So it's not something we do a lot of for that reason. Yeah.
Any thought on the use of biochar as a soil amendment?
Yeah, I have a big friend and permaculturist, Dale Hendricks, who's a big biochar enthusiast. I can't say I use it that much just because I'm quite busy as a farmer and it's kind of a little labor intensive to make. But if you're already like making a campfire, for example, or have like a bonfire area in your yard, or you know, like a little fire pit somewhere, you can basically sift the ash and coals, and when the ash is sifted away, whatever coals you're left with, yeah, it's basically biochar, and you can kind of crush it up into a fine powder. Biochar is an excellent filtration. It's really good for filtering things, and it's also quite good for holding on to like nutrients. So yeah, when you activate it by like soaking it in like compost tea or something like that, and then putting it in your soil, it's supposed to be really good. I can't really say I have a lot of personal experience with it, so I can't really say like, oh, for sure it's been great for me or whatever, but I do know a lot of people who kind of swear by it. But for me personally, the main reason I don't use it is because it's just making a lot of biochar on a massive level is quite labor intensive and probably not worth it, in my opinion.
Another community garden question. In older community gardens, we have insects that destroy crops like flea beetles, tomato worms, and squash beetles. We can't have chickens, so what can we do?
That's a great question. So flea beetles are one of the trickiest things to manage in a garden. I hate those little guys. But they can be managed without sprays very easily through something called row cover. It's basically like a fine fabric that lets light and oxygen and water through, but is too fine to allow the little flea beetles to get through themselves. So once you plant your little, let's say cabbage plants or broccoli plants, two plants which flea beetles really love, as you probably know, you put that row cover over it, and it's able to keep the flea beetles out, and then you don't need sprays. So all the organic vegetable farms around me that are basically only doing vegetables on a large scale, they all use row cover a lot for a lot of their crops, not just for flea beetles, but for many other issues as well. So that can help, although I don't really like to use row cover. I almost only use it to deal with flea beetles for that reason, because I like to bring in a lot of good stuff too. So you mentioned the tomato worms, the tomato hornworm. The best way to deal with that, I find, is to bring in a lot of biodiversity, bring in a lot of flowers. So plant flowers like even like dill is a really good one. Dill and cilantro, when they go to flower, they bring in a lot of parasitic wasps. And those parasitic wasps are attracted by the nectar of the flowers, but then they're going to look for their caterpillars, which they parasitize. And one of those is a parasitic wasp that goes after the tomato hornworm. So if you ever see a tomato hornworm, it's got all these little white sacs on its back. It's been parasitized by a wasp, and it's basically dead already. It's going to die, and you don't want to get rid of it or squish it, because you want to let those wasps hatch out and complete the next life cycle of more wasps. But basically, the more flowers you're able to bring in near or in your garden of various kinds, especially native flowers and really pollinator attracting flowers, and things in the Apiaceae carrot family like the dill and cilantro, you'll notice that your tomato hornworms become a non-issue. Because for us, we grow lots of tomatoes every year, and I hardly ever see them. And whenever I do, they're almost always already parasitized. So give it a try and see if that helps.
What do you know about the work of John Hershey with nut trees in Pennsylvania starting in the 1930s? This is a longish question, so I'll ask all the parts. Do you grow nut trees and persimmons and crab apples as he did? Hershey also bred larger and more productive varieties of nuts and fruits, including crab apples. There are still remnants of Hershey's nursery around Downingtown.
Yes, absolutely. I love that question. That's really, I was very happy to hear that question. So yes, I've been to the Hershey nursery sites probably 6 times or so. I usually go almost every year. I have collected some scion from those sites, including those crab apples that you speak of. And I'm actually propagating those and then planting them out here in my farm. So I planted out those same crab apples, which I basically grabbed some scion from, grafted it, and now I have those that very same Hershey crab apple growing here in my farm. I do plant American persimmons. I don't plant them in the regular part of my orchard because they're very tall trees. So I have them in my like silvopasture area that where taller trees are more acceptable and sort of on the margins of the farm. And then I also have Asian persimmons and hybrid persimmons as well that I'm growing. But I love the American persimmons, and I think they're really fantastic both for people and livestock, as are pretty much everything Hershey grew. So I've got some honey locust here planted as well, which is also seed from Hershey. We have chestnuts as well, which Hershey was really into. Hickories, pecans. We actually grow a lot of different kinds of nuts as well. So Hershey is kind of one of my farming heroes, and yeah, I know quite a lot about him and his history, and I think it's wonderful that whoever commented about Hershey is very much aware of him as well. So I hope to both me and the other people who are sort of involved with those nursery sites. There's a lot of other guys who are more nurserymen, and they've been propagating a lot of that stuff and saving those cultivars. And I've got one of his persimmons as well, Mackenzie persimmon, we call it, because it's from Mackenzie Street there. So yeah, we're all hoping we can kind of let Hershey's legacy live on in a lot of our farms in which we're spreading these both through farming and then through nurseries by propagating them and offering for sale for people.
Can you talk a little bit more about the issue you were mentioning about boxwoods and other ornamentals?
Yeah, so boxwoods are they're non-native shrubs that are more or less evergreen, and they make for kind of like a nice shrub that doesn't do much and doesn't really have much what's care needs, so you can kind of not to worry about it. So they're very much favored by landscapers for that reason. So you can just kind of throw them in the ground and boom, you've got a shrub, and you don't really have to worry about doing anything to it. But they don't provide much value to us, aside from looking okay. And I don't even think they look that nice personally. I think they just look okay. Aside from that, they're really not bringing in many native birds or insects because they're not native to begin with. They're not giving us food. So if they weren't native, right, but they were edible, well, that would be okay, right? Just like an apple tree, they're not native, but they're edible, or a peach or something like that. But boxwoods aren't edible either. So when you look at the functions they provide, it's very minimal. So in permaculture, we always try to we have a principle called multiple functions, where everything that's in a permaculture system should be there for not just one function, but for a whole bunch of different reasons. So maybe it's edible and it's also native, and it also brings in this one native butterfly that only that species can bring in, like pawpaws has a caterpillar and a butterfly that the zebra swallowtail that only feeds on pawpaw leaves. So you'll never get that butterfly if you don't have pawpaws around. So the more multiple functions we can have for these things, and it could be basketry or fiber or whatever. It doesn't have to necessarily be edible or native, but the more functions you can get, then the more it makes sense to put them in our landscapes, I would say. So there's plenty of great shrubs out there that can fruit, and that look even better really than boxwoods. So, when instead of boxwoods, I would probably plant like currants and gooseberries and eat an autumn olive. As we said, it's a naturalized thing. It's somewhat invasive, but it's better than a boxwood in my opinion, because at least it's giving us functions of nitrogen fixation and fruit bearing and really delicious edible yields. Nanking cherries are a really great one too. They're very, very pretty. And give us these great edible cherries like in June. So yeah, there's just many, many better choices than boxwoods.
Do you give tours of your farm?
So yes and no. Because we have a lot of interest in our farm, it's hard to give individual tours, because we would just have to take so much time away from the work that we do here, designing and farming. But what we do is every year we'll have like an open house tour. This year we did it through the Bucks County Food Shed Alliance. We usually do that around June because that's my favorite time of year on the farm, when like our berry diversity, like that berry bowl you see in front of you on that slide, that was from June. So it's just, the farm looks really beautiful that time of year, and there's just a lot of things fruiting. So that's usually when I like to do our open house tour. So our website is 100fruitfarm.com, and you can kind of subscribe to it. I think there should be a subscribe link on the bottom, but if not, you can always just come back and check every now and then. And around the time June is rolling around, just go to our website and you'll probably see the date for our open house tour. Or you can email us, and then we'll try to email you when we put the tour date up. Although that's a little harder because it's harder to juggle all those emails. But yeah, we do have an open house tour that we open completely to the public, completely free, where we'll give a tour whoever wants to come and show them around the farm and talk about everything we're doing here. Or you could also join our buyers club if you're more local. That's like our that kind of CSA type model we have, where then you can be our customer and come to our farm like every week and see it, walk around with your family as you're here, and just kind of look at our sheep and as you're picking up your order form. So that's kind of a little trick to get in without, although we wouldn't be able to give you a tour still, but I think actually we have a separate tour also for our buyers club members. So they do get a tour actually as well.
We're just about at the end. One quick last question. Do you sell your crops to restaurants?
So not yet. I hope that's someone who's from a restaurant, because we do plan on doing that in the somewhat near future, because we have a few crops that are just so productive that we can't handle it all. So we won't be able to soon. Mostly we grow a lot of different things, right? In little amounts, a little bit of everything. So that most of that we can sell to our customers. But for example, our pawpaws are so productive, and we have so many of them that are still young, and a lot of our trees are still young here, and we're not nearly at the level of maximum production yet. But in the future, we'll have so many thousands of pounds of pawpaws every year, which we really, really need to find some markets to restaurants. So pawpaws will definitely be one. Our aronia berries will also probably be looking for some wholesale outlets for restaurants. So a few select crops that we have will be selling to restaurants, and definitely pawpaws will be one of them. But most of the other stuff, because it's in smaller amounts, it wouldn't really make sense for us to sell to restaurants, and we can sell it to customers who will come directly to our farm.
Well, thank you, Adam. Thank you for being our presenter this month for Science on Tap. It was really great to have you. We hope to see you sometime at the Wagner in person. And reminder for everyone, second Monday next month, December, Chris?
December 13th.
is the next Science on Tap. So come and join all of us, and we will get out a recording, and it'll be delivered to your email, the email that you used to sign up, with a link to watch it. Thanks, everyone, and thanks, Adam.
All right, thank you so much. It was my pleasure. I hope it was useful and enjoyable for those of you who are here. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Super informative, and I can't wait to come up to an open house to see the farm.
Cool. Look forward to it. Yeah, and while I'm still here, my email is just 100fruitfarm spelled out like the word 100. So if you guys have any additional questions or something about the farm or anything, just send me an email, or you can go to 100fruitfarm.com too. That's our farm website. So thanks a lot.